Tom Bennett's boots crunched on the gravel as he wandered into the heart of the forgotten town, a place where the sun seemed reluctant to shine, where dust clung stubbornly to cracked windows and hope seemed as brittle as the weathered wooden signs swinging in the wind. He had no intention of staying long. Just passing through, like he always did when the weight of his life pressed too hard against his chest. But then something caught his eye. At the edge of a ramshackle storefront, barely noticeable amid the clutter and decay, was a figure. A girl. No more than 12, maybe 11. She was tied to a rusted metal post. Her wrists raw, skin pale beneath grime and bruises that spoke of too many days spent under harsh hands. The faded sunlight struck her like a spotlight, emphasizing how small and fragile she was in a world so harsh and unyielding. Tom stopped, the sound of the wind fading from his ears as his mind recoiled against the scene before him. It was more than just a child in pain. It was a life stolen, a soul shackled by invisible chains far heavier than the ones biting into her skin. She didn't look up when he approached. Her eyes, dulled by exhaustion and fear, stared past him as if seeing a world far away, a place where kindness might still exist. The people in town passed by without a second glance, their faces masks of indifference or avoidance. A man leaned against the doorway, flicking ash from his cigarette with practiced disinterest, eyes cold and unfeeling. The bartender cleaned a glass behind the counter, pretending not to notice the girl's silent plea for help. Tom saw it all, the apathy, the resignation, and it crushed something deep inside him. He knelt slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly, voice rough from years of dust and silence. The girl flinched but didn't pull away. "You all right?" No answer. Not yet. It was the first barrier. Silence born from trauma, from having learned that speaking out only brought more pain. Tom's heart ached with 1,000 unspoken words, 1,000 untold stories locked behind those haunted eyes. Who had done this to her? How long had she been left here, forgotten and betrayed? The thought was a slow, poisonous drip in his mind, and he clenched his fists to stop the trembling inside. The man from the doorway stepped forward then, a sneer curling his lips. "She's no one's concern but hers," he spat. "Just a kid caught in the wrong place. Bet she's better off where she is." Tom's gaze sharpened, the old fire flickering to life after years of quiet desperation. "That's a lie. Nobody deserves this," he said, voice low but firm. "What's your price?" The man looked at him like he was crazy, then laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the stillness. "You wanna buy her? For what? To save her. You don't even know the first thing about her." Tom met his eyes, unwavering. "Maybe I don't. But I know she doesn't belong here." The crowd's murmur swelled around them. Curiosity, judgment, fear, all tangled in a web of complacency. But Tom's decision was made. He reached into his pocket, feeling the crumpled bills. Money that could barely cover the ranch's next mortgage, money he could hardly afford to lose. But something inside him had snapped loose, a tether to hope he thought long gone. The man nodded slowly, seeing the resolve in Tom's eyes. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." As the ropes were cut away and Mia, the girl's name whispered by a sympathetic bystander, was handed over, Tom saw something flicker behind her weary eyes. A fragile, trembling spark of trust. It was faint, like the first fragile light of dawn breaking through a long, endless night. Walking away from that broken place with her at his side, Tom felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about a girl. It was about the chance to redeem something lost, perhaps even himself. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon with hues of orange and violet, Tom knew their lives had changed forever. The ride back to the ranch was silent, the kind of silence that presses against the ribs and refuses to be broken. Tom's truck rumbled steadily over cracked country roads, the worn leather seat beneath him rough and familiar, yet today it felt foreign, like he was carrying more than just a passenger. Mia sat quietly in the passenger seat, her small hands clenched tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the window as if the world outside held some secret she dared not trust. Tom stole glances at her in the dim light, the fading sunset casting long shadows across her delicate face. There was something fragile yet fierce about her, a paradox that pulled at his gut like an echo of his own fractured past. He remembered the nights on the ranch, long and lonely, filled with the weight of mistakes and regrets he had buried beneath the endless work of raising cattle and chasing horizons. For years, the ranch had been his refuge, a fortress against the storms inside him. But now, with Mia beside him, that refuge felt suddenly porous, vulnerable. "What's your name?" he finally asked, voice low and gentle, careful not to startle the fragile creature beside him. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes flicked toward him, wary, guarded, as if measuring every word, every breath. Tom knew that look well. It was the look of someone who had learned that trust was a luxury too dangerous to afford. Still he tried again. "I'm Tom. You're safe now." The words felt inadequate, almost hollow in the vast quiet between them. But he hoped they were a beginning. The ranch was a sprawling patchwork of fields and fences, rough-hewn barns and open skies. When they arrived, the night had already settled deep, stars prickling the velvet blackness above like distant promises. Tom led Mia inside the farmhouse, the creak of the wooden floorboards echoing in the stillness. Inside, the scent of leather and pine mingled with the faint trace of smoke from the hearth. Tom's eyes swept over the modest rooms, thinking about what lay ahead, about how fragile the balance of their lives would become. This wasn't just about shelter or food. It was about hope, healing, and the slow, painful process of reclaiming a stolen childhood. Mia's fingers brushed against a worn blanket as Tom pulled it from a chair and gently wrapped it around her. She flinched, then relaxed just a fraction, as if the simple act of warmth was a small, unexpected mercy. In that moment, Tom felt the weight of his own loneliness settle beside hers, two broken souls finding a tenuous connection. The night stretched on, and Tom found himself sitting across from Mia at the kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee cooling forgotten beside him. He thought of his life before, the quiet routine of dawn chores, the endless expanse of land, the solitude he once cherished. All of it seemed to pale in comparison to the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. What kind of future could he offer her? Could a man like him, with his scars and silent regrets, protect someone so small, so wounded? The question gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. But deep beneath the doubt, something fierce and stubborn flared, an instinct to fight, to shield, to give what little he had. In the quiet of that farmhouse, Tom made a decision, not just to save Mia from her immediate torment, but to become something he never thought he could be. A guardian, a protector, a flicker of hope in a world that had been cruel and unkind. As dawn broke, spilling pale light across the fields, Tom knew their journey was only beginning. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the fragile stirrings of something like purpose, a promise whispered between broken hearts. The days that followed were a delicate dance on a fragile thread, where every step risked shattering the tentative bond slowly forming between Tom and Mia. The ranch, usually a place of routine and steady rhythms, now felt like uncharted territory, a landscape as unpredictable as the emotions swirling beneath the surface. Tom watched her with careful eyes, learning to read the small signs. A twitch of the lip, a flinch at sudden movements, the way her eyes darted away when he tried to reach out. Mia's silence was both a shield and a barrier. She didn't speak much, and when she did, her voice was a quiet thing, fragile as thin ice. Tom knew that years of pain had wrapped themselves around her like armor, each layer built to keep the world out. But beneath the cold exterior, he glimpsed shadows of a child desperate to belong, to be seen, not as broken but as whole. Their first attempts at routine were clumsy. Mia resisted the simplest things, eating meals, sleeping in the guest room, even stepping outside into the open air of the ranch. Tom's heart ached each time she recoiled from his presence, but he refused to give up. Instead, he leaned into patience, understanding that trust could not be rushed. It had to be earned, moment by fragile moment. He started by sharing small rituals, inviting her to help with chores that required no words but offered quiet companionship. The early mornings feeding the cattle, the slow walk along the fence lines, These became their unspoken language. Tom learned that trust sometimes begins in silence, in the steady heartbeat of shared work and the unassuming presence of another. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and gold over the fields, Tom noticed Mia sitting by the barn, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. Without thinking, he sat beside her, careful not to break the fragile calm. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I'm here." For a long moment she said nothing, then finally her voice emerged, barely a whisper. "Why me?" The question shattered the quiet between them like glass. Tom didn't have a ready answer. How do you explain why a child is stolen from innocence? Why the world can be cruel and unforgiving? Instead, he reached out gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, a tentative touch that spoke more than words ever could. "I don't know why," he admitted honestly. "But I do know this: I'm not going anywhere. You're safe here." It was the first crack in the wall Mia had built around herself. Slowly, imperceptibly, she leaned into the promise of safety, allowing the possibility of something new: hope. The nights were the hardest. Shadows lengthened in the dark corners of the farmhouse, and memories, both theirs, crept in like unwelcome ghosts. Mia's nightmares sometimes broke through her fragile veneer, waking her in tears or silence that weighed heavy in the stillness. Tom sat by her side during those long hours, holding space for pain he couldn't erase but could share. In those moments, Tom understood that saving Mia was not about fixing what was broken but about being present through the brokenness. It was about witnessing her pain without judgment, offering steadiness when the world felt like it was collapsing. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their lives began to shift. The walls between them thinned, replaced by moments of quiet laughter, a tentative smile, a shared glance that held promise. The ranch, once a symbol of isolation, became a sanctuary, a place where trust, like the stubborn grass beneath the harsh sun, started to grow. Tom's heart, once guarded and closed off, softened in ways he hadn't anticipated. Mia was no longer just a child he had rescued. She was becoming part of his life, his story, an unexpected light in the dark chapters of both their pasts. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, marked by shadows of trauma and the lingering scars of betrayal, Tom believed, in the deepest part of himself, that healing was possible. That together, they could build a future not defined by the pain behind them but by the fragile hope blossoming between them. The quiet peace Tom and Mia had begun to build felt like a fragile glass sculpture, beautiful but perilously thin, vulnerable to the slightest tremor. That tremor came not from the vast fields or the harsh isolation of the ranch, but from the shadows of the past that refused to stay buried. Tom first noticed it in small ways. The distant sound of an unfamiliar truck rolling down the gravel road late at night, eyes watching from the edges of the property, vague but persistent threats whispered in the dark. The feeling of being hunted settled deep in his bones, a primal warning he could neither ignore nor fully understand. Mia, too, grew restless, her eyes flickering with fear when strangers passed near the ranch, her body tensing as if bracing for blows unseen. The silence she had so fiercely guarded was broken by whispered questions, trembling voices that hinted at a storm gathering on the horizon. One evening, as the sun bled crimson behind the hills, a group of men arrived at the farmhouse door, rough, unyielding faces marked by years of hard living and harder intentions. Their presence shattered the fragile calm like a stone through glass. Tom stood protectively in front of Mia, heart hammering as cold dread swept through him. The men didn't beat around the bush. Their voices were sharp, demanding, full of menace and entitlement. They claimed Mia as theirs, as though she were nothing more than property, a price to be paid, a debt to be collected. The words stung, dredging up the darkest truths Tom had tried to keep at bay. Mia was not just a child in need of saving. She was a link to a world of danger, exploitation, and cruelty that refused to let go. Tom's mind raced, grappling with rage and helplessness, a furious protectiveness rising up to meet the threat. But beneath the anger was a paralyzing fear, the fear that the shadows of Mia's past were bigger, stronger than either of them. Mia's silence broke in a whisper. "They'll come back, they always do." Her voice was fragile, raw with the weight of trauma that refused to be silenced. Tom reached out, gripping her hand tightly. "Not while I'm here," he vowed, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew the fight ahead was more complicated than brute strength. It was a battle for Mia's soul, for her future. A war fought in whispers, in trust, in scars invisible to the eye. That night, as the house creaked and shadows lengthened, Tom realized the true magnitude of what he'd taken on. Protecting Mia wasn't just about keeping the men away. It was about confronting the darkness that lingered inside her, about unraveling the tangled threads of fear and pain that threatened to consume them both. And as dawn cracked through the window, casting pale light over two weary faces, Tom made a silent promise. No matter the cost, no matter the threat, he would not let Mia be swallowed by the past. Because some battles are not fought with fists or fire, but with unwavering presence and the fierce courage to stand, even when the night feels endless. The courtroom was a stark arena, cold and unforgiving, where Tom found himself confronting not only the legal system but the weight of every invisible scar that Mia carried. Each hearing peeled back layers of a reality so harsh it threatened to break them both, yet within that exposure, a new kind of resilience began to take shape, one forged not in isolation but through the relentless fight for justice and belonging. Tom sat beside Mia, watching her as she clung to a fragile thread of courage. Her eyes, once shadowed with fear, now flickered with a tentative strength. The judge's words echoed around them, legal jargon twisting into emotional barbs that cut deep. The men who had once stalked the edges of their lives sat across the room, their faces masks of defiance and entitlement, unwilling to relinquish control over a life that was never truly theirs. With every piece of evidence presented, with every testimony, Tom saw the subtle shifts in Mia. Her trust in him growing, her voice finding strength, her silence slowly giving way to words. But the battle was not just external. The courtroom became a crucible where Mia's deepest wounds were tested. The memories she had locked away surged forward, painful recollections that threatened to undo her fragile healing. Tom struggled with his own helplessness in those moments, feeling the weight of responsibility crush him. How do you protect someone from their past when that past is the very ground beneath their feet? How do you hold steady when the world demands proof of suffering and worthiness, reducing a child's trauma to evidence and testimony? Yet amid the turmoil, a powerful bond cemented itself. The fight for justice forged between them a connection deeper than words, a promise that no matter the outcome, Mia would never face the darkness alone. Tom became not just a guardian but a partner in survival, navigating the labyrinth of legal and emotional battles side by side. Outside the courtroom, the ranch stood as a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the sterile halls of justice. Here, Mia learned that safety was not just a word but a lived experience, anchored by Tom's unwavering presence. Together, they planted seeds of hope in the rough earth, nurturing a future that once seemed impossible. The legal fight stretched on, grueling and exhausting, but with every small victory, Mia's laughter returned in fragments, her eyes brightened with possibility. Tom saw in her the fragile yet fierce spirit of survival, the courage not just to endure but to reclaim life on her own terms. In those moments of quiet triumph, Tom realized the true victory was not the courtroom's final ruling but the unbreakable trust they had built. It was a victory carved from pain, resilience, and the unwavering commitment to face the shadows together. And as the sun set beyond the hills, casting long golden rays over the ranch, Tom knew that this was just the beginning, not of an easy path, but of a shared journey where healing was possible, and love was the fiercest kind of justice. The evening air was thick with an uneasy stillness, as if the ranch itself was holding its breath. Tom sat on the porch, the weight of days, weeks really, pressing down on his chest like a storm cloud threatening to burst. Mia was inside, restless and withdrawn, caught in the relentless pull of memories she neither welcomed nor could escape. It was in this fragile quiet that the unexpected arrival shattered the fragile calm. The woman appeared without warning, stepping out from the shadows of the dusk like a ghost from another life. Her eyes were sharp, glinting with a mixture of fear and resolve, and though she wore the dust and weariness of a long journey, there was an undeniable strength in her presence. Tom's heart caught. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, a tether to a past he thought was buried deep beneath years of silence. She spoke with a voice that trembled only briefly before settling into a steady, deliberate tone. "My name is Evelyn. I knew Mia's mother." The words hung heavy between them, pulling the air taut. Tom felt the ground shift beneath him as old secrets began to surface. Secrets that Mia's silence had shielded but never truly erased. Evelyn revealed a story tangled with pain and betrayal, one that wove through the fabric of Mia's family history like a dark thread. Mia's mother had been caught in a web of deception and danger, trapped by people who saw her not as a person but as a means to an end. The truth unfolded slowly, each detail peeling back layers of misunderstanding and misplaced guilt that had burdened Mia without her knowledge. As Evelyn spoke, Tom watched Mia's face, a canvas of shock, confusion, and something deeper, a flicker of something long denied: hope. The pieces of Mia's fragmented past began to align, offering a painful clarity that was both a balm and a wound. For the first time, Mia was not just a victim of circumstance but a bearer of a legacy she could start to understand and perhaps overcome. But Evelyn's presence also brought new dangers. The people who had hunted Mia's mother, the shadows that had lingered just beyond reach, were stirred awake by her return. Tom's protective instincts flared anew, but this time the fight was more complex, rooted not just in physical threat, but in the fragile trust between past and present, between silence and revelation. In the quiet that followed Evelyn's arrival, Tom and Mia sat together, the weight of the past settling around them like dust. Words were scarce, but in the shared silence, a new chapter was beginning, one where truth, no matter how painful, offered a path to healing. The mystery of Mia's origins was no longer a chain but a bridge, fragile yet strong enough to carry them forward. Tom's mind raced with questions, fears, and a cautious hope. Could this unexpected visitor be the key to unlocking the future Mia deserved? Could the shadows of yesterday finally be faced, not alone but together? As the night deepened, Tom realized that the true battle was not just against the dangers outside, but the demons within, the secrets, the silence, and the scars that only truth could begin to heal. And with Evelyn's arrival, the story that had been buried so long was finally ready to be told.